Hello and welcome to the Band of One podcast. I am Riley Wilson, and this podcast is designed for anybody that wants to start, maintain, or grow a solo or small group performing career. I have over 50 years of live performance experience, and we use not only what I've learned, but also from other hardworking pros in their neck of the woods. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. Let's get underway. Today I'm with a fellow that I just found out about the other day on a web page. I'll explain more in a moment. Bill Barney. Bill, welcome.
Thank you. Very good to be here, Ryan.
So this is how this all came about. You and I are both on a Facebook group called Backing Tracks.
Yes.
I happened to find out somebody had asked, hey, does anybody do this kind of performance in North Carolina? And you chimed in, and I went to your webpage, and I thought, this guy's good. I want to talk to him. So I'm really glad you joined me this morning. Let's get underway. First of all, where does the Bill Barney story begin?
You know, like so many musicians with garage bands in my youth, back in the 60s and 70s, and it was something that was always, was as much of a social experience as anything else, but it was a lot of fun. And I grew up in a musically oriented household. My mother played piano. My uncle actually performed guitar when radio was big, and that was kind of where it all started.
Where was this growing up?
That was in College Park, Maryland, right, down from the University of Maryland.
I know exactly where that is, right around the corner of Turpville or Terrapins, right?
Yes,
That's
yes, it is.
wonderful. That's wonderful. So, growing up, you mentioned that mom played piano and you had an uncle that was musical. What was the first thing that you dabbled with? Were you in choir in school or something like that, or mom forced you piano lessons, or what kind of things got you going?
Well, other than piano, or instead of piano, I should say, I did violin lessons for 3 years,
Wow.
and
Wow.
it was an interesting experience. And they tried and tried and tried to teach me how to read music, and I always found it much easier just to let me just hear it, and I'll do it. And it came to me because I have an aptitude for that.
I was going to say, I'm sure that growing up with a mother that played piano, did you hear her practicing, for example?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, during the holidays in particular, we all get together. And then once I started playing guitar, that would chime in. And we would go to do family outings at other homes. And my uncle would bring his guitar, and we just enjoy the music.
You know what's interesting about that? My friend Wolf Marshall, who is a tremendous guitar book author and also a really good player, he's based in California, said that he grew up, his mother was a classical pianist, and he remembers being placed under her piano when he was still, probably a toddler. And he would listen to her play these particular pieces of music. And if she made an error, she'd go back and play this passage over and over and over. So he was used to hearing that at an early age. And I'm wondering if that might have had something to do with your developing an ear for things, that it was easier for you to hear things than to try and read things.
Well, it did. I mean, in particular, I've always been relatively, I don't want to overstate, but sensitive or at least empathetic to which was around me, and the music just touched the nerve, and I connected to it. And I remember going to a Disney movie. I forget what it was, but there was a beautiful music background in it, and I went home and tried to play it on the piano, and I thought I can't do this, so I got to figure this out. So one thing led to another.
Wow. So let's address something that you just said here. One of the greatest things about this podcast, which I started a couple of years ago, is I get to kind of pick people's brains and just kind of have a dialogue about stuff. You mentioned being sensitive to stuff. I've always been a very sensitive person, which has caused me some tears from time to time. But I also think it helped me to become a really good musician at an early age. I was in my first band at 13 and was in one of the biggest bands in the Southeast by the time I was 18 years old, and a freshman at NC State in Raleigh, which we'll get to in a little bit. But I think it's important that if you have an aptitude for music or you have a gift, that you realize that you're a little bit different from other people, and to perhaps take your cues more from yourself or other people of that ilk than the average person who's not necessarily sensitive, not necessarily empathetic, and may or may not have any musical aptitude whatsoever. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I think early on it presents a specific challenge because those around you that may not be of the same ilk, they find their way a little more easily, I guess you could say. And
Yes.
it's challenging to fit in. I was kind of invisible going through grammar school, and the guy in the corner that didn't have a whole lot of friends. and I just couldn't figure out why, and music just opened up a whole new realm for me.
I completely get it. So, you were playing some piano, but I get the feeling that there's some other musical instruments that you also play. So, did you start dabbling with other things, and at what point?
Well, I did in high school band. I played the sousaphone or the tuba. Um,
Wow.
Interestingly enough, I think they brought people in to do that just to carry it on the field because it looked cool. But then I outsmarted them and I figured out what I was supposed to play and I ended up playing it anyway. So, but no, the violin, piano, a little bit, the tuba, and then the guitar, and get the guitar was really where I kind of rested. I found my own place in music.
I was going to say, being a brass player and walking around with that, high school, band stuff is huge, especially here in Texas, and that's quite an accomplishment to be able to move your feet and play in time. And there's a lot involved with that. Did you find that that helped you maybe later on when you went to the guitar? I'm assuming that you sing as well, right?
I do. And matter of fact, I'm probably a better singer than guitar player. That being said, but it did. It helped me with timing and helped me look at music a little differently. It certainly did. Yes.
It's very interesting. We'll revisit that a little bit later. So you've got piano, violin, tuba, and now guitar by the time what you're a senior in high school?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So, you've determined that you're a little bit different than the other folks you went to school with. Did that intone a path for you after high school? Did you go to college or anything at all like that?
Went to college for one semester. I was going to go. Of course, I growing up and playing in bands, I had, as my mother would say, wires everywhere. So I thought, well, I'll become an electronics engineer. Well, I went away to college, and I got to college, and I learned it was all about math. I'm saying I'm looking for the wires and the tubes and everything, and I'm like, boy, this is just not what I expected. So I came home and decided to go a different path.
So, electrical engineering, any of you folks that are listening to that are an EE, congratulations. That is a very challenging field, especially if you don't have a math aptitude. I have no math aptitude, except I can count to 13. And of course, the joke Zig Ziglar used to say, if you can count to seven, you can be a musician. And Riley says, if you can count to 13, you can be a jazz musician. So
There we go.
that's as far as it goes. But anyway, so what did you decide after finding out that an EE degree might not be in Bill's future?
Well, of course, I was basically starting from scratch. I grew up with a very, very smart mother. I came home from college, and of course, she was disappointed. And she said, "Welcome home. I love you. Now these are the bills you're going to pay." So I ended up. I knew right away I needed to get a job. I had worked through grammar school and early high school in McDonald's, so I had restaurant background. So I went to work for the Marriott Corporation, and interestingly enough, I just saw it as a short term gig, but I ended up running into people that were very smart about developing people and teaching people how to manage and be professionals. And it was one of the best moves I made, actually, because it turned into a whole new career for me.
You know what's interesting about that? I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I had a chance to read Bill Marriott's biography. And if you've never read that,
Mm.
that's another excellent book just about how not only he was a member of the church, but created an international corporation.
Yep.
And Bill Marriott and the company, I think, does a really great job of training people and helping them to get better and better and promoting from within. Was that your experience?
No question. It was absolutely, it really was. It was the best training ground for me because I knew nothing about business. I knew a little bit about flipping hamburgers from working at McDonald's, but I was also fortunate enough to interact with some very wonderful people that became friends and mentors that developed my personal career, my professional career. And so I was able to expound on that. And I worked in the hospitality industry for over 40 years, and from management supervision, regional vice president. I worked probably the last 5 to 8 years as a franchise business consultant. So I learned so much about just being a business person and how to deal with people.
Wow. I want to circle back to that in a minute because that business background, I suspect, has everything to do with the success you're enjoying now. But let's rewind a little bit. once you learn to play the guitar, have you started playing music with other people? Are you in a band or anything at all like that? Or how does that any of that factor in?
So I was the shy kid in the corner that played rhythm guitar and sang a little bit. I could hit the notes, but I had no projection, and I stuttered as a child. And so, but it was as much social gathering as anything else. We played for a couple of gigs, but I really it was never really going to go anywhere. And what surprised me is that I was transferred by Marriott in 1975 to California, Northern California. It was my first real away from home experience, and I moved into an apartment, and I was there maybe for 3 or 4 months and playing my guitar on my amplifier, I wanted to buy a better guitar, and I thought to myself, well, that's kind of stupid. I'm here in my own apartment playing for myself. What do I need with better instruments? So I made a deal with myself that if I could get a job singing somewhere, that I would use that money to purchase better equipment.
Wow. I like that. A little bit of leverage or the carrot in front of the donkey, right?
Absolutely.
But you'd not played any gigs except playing in a band before that. So were you going to go out and play solo gigs?
I was fortunate. I was a regular at an Italian restaurant, and I got to know the owner. And he and I had become friends. So I once I made my decision, I went to him. His name was Sebastian. I said, Sebastian, have you ever thought about having live entertainment in your restaurant? It was a little family-oriented Italian restaurant, nice little place. And he looked at me as if to say, please don't ask me this, because he knew what was coming. And I said, well, I know how you feel. I said, I'll tell you what, let's do this. Let's do one night. I'll just play for tips, no charge, and we'll see how it works. Well, I was there for 5 years after that.
Isn't it funny how when you start something like that, that it often ends up taking off? When we first moved to Frisco in July of '96, there were three restaurants in town. One of them was a guy named Randy Burks who has a steakhouse that's present to this day, Randy Steakhouse. And I went in there and told him I'd been doing that in Raleigh for a while, which I had. And I said, look, I'll do this for an hour on Friday night. And I said, you pay me $25 for the hour. I said, any tips I get, I keep. And I said, if you like what I do, I stay. And if you don't like what I do, just tell me and I'll leave. And I ended up being there for 3 years. And I think it's funny because restaurateurs often don't realize how important live music is and can be. I want to circle back around to something. Now, this is your first solo gig. So, Bill, what are you doing? What are you playing?
You know, I was a big fan of James Taylor, like so many people at that point in time, and of course his style was probably much easier to adapt to than many, particularly for a solo artist. I liked Billy Joel. I liked Bread. I liked the Eagles. And but of course, I had to make sure that my repertoire was sort of low key, being in a restaurant environment and nothing crazy. And so I would just spend my free time learning one song after another and playing the vinyl records at the time and learning the songs step by step. And it was a true growth experience.
Well, let's talk about that for just a moment because I find this interesting. For a person that stuttered, who was a self-proclaimed shy person, how did you overcome that at those first gigs or two?
You know, I think, well, certainly the first couple of years with Marriott helped me improve that to some degree, but that doesn't go away quickly, as you may know, since you said you have some similarities.
Yes.
So I think it enabled me to have the courage to just grin and bear it and get out there and do it. And I made it a point not to overstep my abilities. I stayed within myself. But probably just as importantly, and I still do this to this day, whenever I would take a break, I would get out and visit the people in the audience and say, how you doing? Am I too loud? Am I playing something you like? I was nowhere near being able to say, can I play your favorite song? Because my repertoire would not handle that. But anyway, it enabled me to interact with people, and I'm sure you learned a long time ago, like I did, that has just as much, if not more, to do with your musical abilities.
You know, that's one of the interesting things. When I first came here, Randy Burks had learned from another guy named Del Frisco, I think was the guy's name. Anyway, he ran a restaurant and he would always go around. This was a high-end steakhouse, and he would
Yeah,
always go around
I'm
and
familiar
shake
with it.
everybody's
Yeah.
hand and be sure that they were there, they had a good time. Randy would do that with his clientele. And even though they went through massive construction and tearing up a main street right in front of his building for probably 7 or 8 years, his business has continued to grow and thrive. And he's been in business since 1996, does a great job. And it's interesting because I've seen other restaurateurs that don't do that. And
Hmm.
particularly if I have the opportunity to play there, it's a matter of weeks or months and they're out of business.
Hmm.
And I'm surprised. I also find it really interesting because you're the first guy that I've talked to that's talked about Italian restaurants. And I think for those folks like you and me that are thinking about making the leap to become a solo player, I think an Italian restaurant is a pretty good place to begin, don't you?
Absolutely, and there is some um, invisible connection between Italian restaurants and music. And if I think back to all the places that I played over the years, the majority of them have been Italian restaurants, and the owners and operators are just more open to that sort of total encompassing entertainment value.
I think one of the things about this, at least, and I played an Italian restaurant in Raleigh that started all of that back in 1995 or six, I think it was. But I think most Italian restaurants tend to be small.
Hmm.
There tends to be one or two people that run the place, and they generally are friendly and approachable, which is how they manage to open a business and stay in business. And
Yes.
so I think for those folks that are thinking about just jumping on the solo act bandwagon, I can think of few places that are better to start, you know.
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's performer friendly. I mean, I even to this day, I never really had much of an edge to my performance. If I went to a hard edged bar room, I mean, I suppose I could get through it, but it wouldn't be the greatest fit. But an Italian restaurant really lends itself to that.
Well, it's interesting because I just had a podcast with a fellow named Sam Baker that we aired recently. And Sam talks about the fact that he aligns his music specifically to the audience that he's working for. He does mostly retirement facilities. And I think anytime that you have a particular type of gig that you do, whether it's a restaurant, it's a bowling alley, it's a whatever, if you align the music that those people are comfortable with and familiar with to what you're doing, I think you're going to be successful. Has that been your experience?
Absolutely. I think one of the greatest abilities that I've been able to develop over time is being able to read the room. And I've had people talk about, set lists and sharing set lists and all that. And my opinion of that is that's more for a show band. I may have a song list, and I've got a very large repertoire at this point, but I never walk in with a set list because I'll play a song and I'll watch the reaction, and I'm not a big showman. I'm an entertainer, but I watch to see if they're listening a little bit, if they're paying a little bit of attention, if they're mouthing the words, and that gives me a cue. I'm in the right area, the right genre in my repertoire.
For those folks that are, again, that maybe have played in a band that haven't had responsibility for running the show, which as solo performers or small group do, you got to do that. Can you expound on what reading the room means?
I think it's when we talked a little bit before about being sensitive and connecting to people. I believe that's where it starts. I think if you walk in and recognize that it's much less about your musical ability and much more about your connecting with people. And that's true for most businesses. I mean, restaurant businesses or anything else. I mean, you can open a restaurant and have pretty decent food, but if you like the gentleman you talked about with the steakhouse, if you're out there shaking hands and kissing babies, that's going to carry you a lot further.
There is a little bit of a political bent involved in what we do. We don't ever talk about it.
Yep.
That's really true. So you used the Italian restaurant in California for leverage. What kind of guitar did you get?
So I started out. I had uh, a a nondescript guitar that I bought at a department store. It was horrible. It had a thick neck. The action was terrible. I didn't even know about taking it to a luthier and getting it set up and all of that. I had no clue. I was so inexperienced, and then I made good on my deal to buy a better guitar, and I ended up buying a Gibson ES 335. It was a beautiful guitar. I sold it at some point, and I'm sorry that I did, but it was absolutely wonderful. But uh, it was certainly a prized possession. But after a while, I also found it. Um, I did take some guitar lessons from my high school Spanish teacher who taught me how to play fingerstyle, and I found the Gibson 335 was not as conducive to that and didn't have the tone that I really wanted. So I ended up buying an Ovation, and that was about the time when Glenn Campbell made Ovations okay to play because they had there's such a beautiful guitar, and it has great tonality. It sounds the same amplified as it does naturally, and I love the fact that one of the characteristics, as you know, is that the Ovations have a relatively slender neck, so you can play them for a period of time, and it's not overwhelming.
I think one of the other things that I love about Ovations is that they're really consistent. I lived in Raleigh for years, and I have a buddy who used to joke if we're outside playing a job and it's 96 degrees. He said, "At least it's humid," and which is true. And of course, here in Texas, we regularly have times we're playing outside and it's over 100 degrees.
Oh yeah.
So one of the good things about Ovations, it's not the most toneful acoustic guitar, but they're very reliable. They stay in tune. They take a pounding. And if you're going to sweat, 16 ounces of water across one in 4 hours, the guitar is not going to fall apart in your hands. My
Yes.
wife and I had our entire family, I believe it was Destin, Florida, about 2 years ago. And I saw a young man playing a Taylor, but it was like a 10 series. He said, I've got about a half a dozen really nice Taylors at home. And he said, every single one of them, if I take it out here, they will literally fall apart and just cave in from all the moisture and stuff. So he
Wow.
had to play a guitar that essentially was either pressed wood or plywood or whatever, because it wouldn't hang in an environment that's 100% humidity because he's playing right by the water. So,
And
so,
I
so
also I've got a Taylor now as well, and I do use it primarily, but I still have my original Ovation Balladeer. Unfortunately, it had to, like many of them, has a crack down the soundboard.
mhm.
But for some reason, the romantic part of me continued to search. I found uh, an exact similar model online without the crack, so I purchased that too. So now I've got the two Ovations, and
Well, they really are good guitars, and I think, as you pointed out earlier, you feel like you're more the singer than the guitar player. And almost everybody that I've profiled on this so far that sings says the equation is at least 55-45 tipped in favor of vocal.
Mhm.
And that sounds like that's your story as well, right?
It is. I mean, certainly you have to get to the point, as you well know, to where you're not having to focus on playing the guitar, and I try to keep it pretty simple. I mean, I would classify myself as a journeyman guitarist. I mean, I can play some jazz chords. I could never play lead. I don't know. I was just too restrictive in my own mind. I couldn't figure it out. I tried practicing with pentatonic scales. I thought this is just no fun at all. So I just, I play sort of an advanced rhythm with a little bit of finger style, but I play pick style too if the song calls for it.
So I'm assuming again that the Italian restaurant, you said you did this for what, 4 years, 5 years?
5 years, yes.
Yeah. So at what point did that end and why?
So it provided 5 years just an incredible experiences. I certainly met some wonderful people. I met my first wife there, and I tell people that she came and she picked me up, but that, that really was enhancing the story a bit. Um, so we ended up moving on because of my full-time job, my real job took us out of the area. I was in San Jose, California, actually, where that was. I do have a fun story about a return trip if you think the timing is good.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I have made so many friends there and so many wonderful customers and that would come in on a regular basis. And when my wife and I returned back to San Jose area to visit her family, a buddy of mine said, "Well, let's go out one night." And so I recommended that my wife have a girls' night, and I go out with my buddies. So uh, it was one of the guys that used to come listen to me play all the time. And so I said, "Where you want to go?" And he said, "Well, let's go to Sorrento's for all time's sake." So we walked in, and I could tell right away something was off. Something was up, and it was palpable. I looked around, and people kind of looked familiar, but I couldn't place them and whatever. And as I got halfway into the restaurant, they rolled down a banner that said, "Won't you come home, Bill Barney?" They had a microphone and the guitar there, and
Wow.
it was just an incredible experience. And what really topped it off is when I took one of my normal break visits. I was visiting a couple that was very regular, and the wife said, "Wait a minute, I want to show you something." So she reaches down in her purse, pulls out a little drawstring bag, opens it up, pulls out a cassette tape, and she said, "You made this for me 3 years ago, and I still listen to it every day." And talk about
Wow.
touching your heart. I mean, it was just incredible.
Wow. That's a tremendous story. And I think that also goes to show, whenever you play a place regularly, people do develop a fondness and an attachment for what you do.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's fabulous. So obviously you moved from California. Where's the next stop? And did you play any at the next location?
So I moved to Houston, Texas, and played a little bit there, but not very much. But then after a year, moved to Dallas um, for the first time, and played in some restaurants there. I was working at the time. I was working for Tony Roma's restaurants. You may remember them.
Yeah, I sure do.
Yeah, they were based in Dallas, and I played in a number of restaurants, including some Tony Roma's there. And but I've moved a lot over the years, 18 times as a matter of fact. So
Wow. In fact, instead of being an Army brat, you're kind of a Marriott brat then,
so pretty
right?
much, I mean, it was all work directed, and every time I moved to a new place, most of the time I was fortunate to find a little spot for me to play some music and stay in touch with that.
So let me ask a question because obviously if you've moved 18 times, that's way more than I have. I moved 4 times growing up and thought that was a lot. That's
Mm.
nothing. What would you use? What was your approach whenever you would talk to a restaurant or whatever in a new town and you wanted to play? How would you approach that?
Well, I would kind of slow the roll a little bit. I would find a spot that I thought was conducive to what I did, and make it a point to get to know the manager or the owner, to gauge the feel, and see if I could establish a relationship just on a person to person basis. And and then I would ask the same question: Have you ever thought about live entertainment? And of course, in some cases, they had live entertainment. So it was back before I had a website and any of that stuff, so I couldn't provide much proof of what I could do. But I'd always start conditionally and make sure they knew that if it didn't work out, that's certainly fine and understandable.
That's really interesting. Did the Marriott background, did that help out with that about how to approach people at the end of the
Well,
day?
as a matter of fact, it did, and probably the most poignant part of that was as I went to work in the corporate office for a year. Upper management probably felt that I needed some more maturity and professional development, of course, and I respected that. So they sent me to a Dale Carnegie course, and that was life changing. Let's say. I mean, it taught me how to win friends and influence people, and how to really gauge myself in surroundings. So that was helpful.
I mentioned this in an early podcast, right? One of the very first episodes is the importance of personal development. And that's certainly one of the titles I have recommended to people. Success Through Positive Mental Attitude by W. Clement Stone. Any of these things are wonderful. Think and Grow Rich, clearly. Zig Ziglar, any of his stuff is good. But did you find that as a result of that, that it actually became easy to talk to people about performing?
Much easier, much easier. I mean, because for whatever reason, I must have picked this up somewhere in that course. I can assume, but I realized it was more about the relationship, and the music was there. It was kind of there, but if I could establish the relationship and some semblance of trust, then it would be much easier for them to consider what I was offering.
After 18 moves, where did you finally say enough is enough and where did you end up?
Well, of course, my final move took me to Raleigh, North Carolina, where I've been since 2001, the longest I've lived in any one spot. I moved to Raleigh. Actually, I was in Dallas for the second time, and I was working at Tony Roma's corporate office. and they went through a sale of the company, and all middle management was let go. So a friend of mine who was also a middle manager, he and I decided to try and do something on our own. So we opened up CC's Pizza franchise. We actually we opened up six of them, and that's what took us to Raleigh. And but I really enjoy here. As a matter of fact, I don't see myself moving anywhere else. It's just a lovely place to live.
Let's talk about CC's for just a moment because those folks that have never been to Dallas, Texas, don't know how CC started off. It started off in a little town called Addison, which is just outside of Dallas. And it started off with a buffet that I believe at one point was either $1.99 or 99 cents. And they had three types of pizza. It was all you can eat.
Hmm.
Because we moved here in July of 96, we're staying in a hotel in Louisville. My wife and I are four children, and the youngest one was about to start kindergarten, and our oldest was starting sixth grade. So you can imagine what a cacophony that was. Anyway, we bought a pizza from CC's, and my wife came in with it. She said, "Look, this is good, but they have an all-you-can-eat buffet, and it's $1.99." I says, "You've got to be kidding." So for a big hungry family, that was a tremendous, tremendous deal. CC's has obviously grown from that point, but it started here, basically in a test kitchen in Addison. And you want to fill in the rest of the story, as it were?
Well, as far as myself, you mean is 'cause I'm not
Yourself
sure.
and the company for that
Well,
matter.
well, I mean, I know that Joe, and I can't. I was searching for his last name in my mind, but a young Italian guy named the restaurant after his mother, or what he called his mother, Cece. I remember that, and they ran a pretty tight ship. Years ago, they were very restrictive on who they were bringing as franchisees, and I had some pizza experience with some other restaurants as well, but um, I know that they were, as you said, they were very inexpensive pizza buffet. It was all I can eat. People used to criticize the product, but actually, if it was executed well, it was is just as good as any other chain pizza restaurant out there. So we basically purchased the rights to open up six pizza restaurants and in the Raleigh Durham area. And I still have people today. Matter of fact, just last week I was playing a gig, and these two ladies came in, and one came up to me in between songs. He says, "You don't remember me, do you?" I said, "Not really. I'm sorry." And she said, "Well, I used to take my kids into your CC's Pizza restaurant, and it saved my budget." So
You know,
it's been funny how that comes out.
well, it was a great value for the money, and unfortunately, here in 2025, as we're recording this podcast, it's hard to say that something is a great value in these days, but it really was, and I think that it really still is. I can tell you personally, our family, along with the two sons, one of whom was actually a college football player on scholarship, we ate a lot of times at Cece's, and it was a good environment. So when you get to Raleigh, you start playing gigs as well, huh?
Well, actually, I took about a year and a half, maybe 2 years off from playing because of opening up starting the new business and opening up the restaurants was more than a full-time job. I certainly missed it. I played a little bit at home, but as things began to settle down, I was able to find an Italian restaurant of all places to start playing locally, and it's kind of rejuvenated my music activities.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. We're going to wrap this up in just a moment because I have several questions to ask you in the second podcast, but I'll simply toss this out. Are you still involved day to day full time with the CC's? Or are you just playing, or how does that work right now?
No, it was 11 years ago when I left basically the partnership, and I took on some other jobs after that. But 4 years in March, and I retired from quote unquote corporate life, if you will, and decided to do music full time, if you will. My objective was I wanted to be able to, if you'll pardon the phrase, I wanted to be able to make enough money to pay my bar bill, and music and business has been so good, I've had to start drinking more. So, not really, but it's a fun story. So.
Wow, that's really interesting, and I think a lot of folks that again, Sam Baker is a good example of somebody who'd been in corporate America for years and years. retires and actually starts a second career performing. I guess the point of the podcast is that no matter where you start, you can always play gigs, you can make money, you can have fun, and most importantly, make connections with people. I think that's probably the significant thing that I'm getting from you is that obviously somebody caring enough to have a "Won't You Come Home" Bill Barney banner and a guitar and a mic and all that. I mean, that says everything, pal.
You're
That's
absolutely right. I
everything.
mean, and particularly at this stage of my life, being no spring chicken and living on my own, if you will, it provides me the opportunity to have such a social connection. I have so many wonderful friends now that we do other things in addition to music, but many of them will come and to my gigs, and we just enjoy each other.
That's so great. That's so great. We're going to wrap this one up for now. You've been listening to the Band of One podcast with Bill Barney, my guest. Bill's webpage is billbarney.com, correct?
Yes,
We'll talk more about that in the second podcast in just a moment. If you like this podcast, again, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have ideas for upcoming podcasts, you can get in touch with me through our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Band One Podcast, or simply email me off my webpage, guitarmadesimpler.com. I'm Riley Wilson. See you next time.